The road into Red Hollow was long, cracked, and lonely. The kind of road that felt like it remembered every tire that had ever passed over it. Ethan Cole slowed his pickup truck as the old wooden sign came into view. The paint was peeling, the bolts rusted, and the left side leaned forward as if the town itself was tired of standing straight. Welcome to Red Hollow. Population not updated. Ethan stared at the sign for a moment longer than necessary. His hands rested calmly on the steering wheel. He wasn't nervous. He wasn't afraid. But the past has a way of tightening around a man's chest even when he thinks he is ready. He adjusted the dark baseball cap on his head, the same habit he carried for years, and drove on. Red Hollow looked smaller than he remembered. Or maybe he had just grown beyond it. The main street stretched ahead, quiet and tense. Old buildings stood shoulder to shoulder like aging men who had seen too much and said too little. The grocery store was boarded up, its windows dark. The diner still stood, though the neon sign flickered weakly, buzzing like a tired heartbeat refusing to stop. Ethan parked his truck near the curb. The engine died, and the silence rushed in. When he stepped out, the sound of his boots hitting the dirt felt louder than it should have. Heads turned slowly. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. A man outside the hardware store stiffened when he saw him. A woman carrying groceries froze, her fingers tightening around the bag before she turned and crossed the street without looking back. They knew him. They always knew him. Ethan was handsome in a quiet, unforced way, sharp jawline, steady eyes, the kind of face that didn't beg for attention, but commanded it anyway. Years of hard work and harder truths had carved patience into his expression. He tipped his cap slightly, not as a greeting, but as acknowledgement. Red Hollow did not greet people. It watched them. He walked slowly down the street, feeling eyes on his back. Every step stirred memories he hadn't allowed himself to revisit in years. Running through these streets as a boy, laughing without fear, believing adults always told the truth. That belief had died here. The Ridgeway Inn sat at the edge of town, just as it always had. A faded sign creaked softly in the wind. Ethan pushed the door open, and the bell above it rang clear, sharp, impossible to ignore. Behind the counter stood Martha Ridgeway. Time had changed her. Her hair was fully gray now, her shoulders slightly hunched, but her eyes were the same, observant, knowing, tired of secrets. She looked up. Her breath caught. "Ethan," she said, almost to herself. He nodded politely. "Ma'am?" For a moment, neither moved. 15 years elapsed into silence. Then Martha exhaled slowly, like someone setting down a weight she'd carried too long. "I always wondered if you'd come back," she said. "I had to," Ethan replied simply. She reached under the counter and slid a key toward him. Room 6. Still works. He took the key, his fingers brushing the worn metal. "Anyone been asking about me?" Martha hesitated. That pause told him everything. "Yes," she said finally. "Sheriff Kane." Ethan's jaw tightened, just slightly. Just slightly. Barely visible. But Martha noticed. "Be careful," she added quietly. "I didn't come here to be reckless," Ethan said. "I came to be honest." He carried his bag to room 6. The door creaked when he opened it. The room smelled faintly of cleaner and old wood. The bedspread was thin, the window blinds crooked. Nothing had changed. He sat on the edge of the bed and stared at the floor for a long moment. Then he stood and walked back outside. The cemetery was quiet. The wind moved gently through dry grass. Ethan stopped in front of a simple headstone. Luke Cole, beloved father, gone too soon. Ethan crouched, resting his forearm on his knee. They still won't say it, he murmured. They still pretend it was an accident. His father hadn't died in an accident. Ethan had known that even at 19, Luke Cole had been ready to expose what the town had buried: illegal deals, poisoned water, bribes that ran deeper than anyone wanted to admit. The town had chosen silence. Luke had paid for it. Footsteps crunched behind him. You shouldn't be here. Ethan stood slowly and turned. Sheriff Daniel Kane stood a few feet away, badge catching the last light of the day. He was older now, broader, more confident. The confidence of a man who believed time had erased his sins. Funny, Ethan said calmly. That's what you told my father too. Kane's eyes narrowed. You left. That was your chance. I was forced out, Ethan replied. There's a difference. This town doesn't need its past dragged back into daylight, Kane said. Ethan adjusted his cap. Truth doesn't care what a town needs. Silence stretched between them. You've got one day, Kane said. Then you leave. Ethan didn't argue. He never had. As Kane walked away, Ethan looked back at the headstone. I'm here now, he whispered. And the town felt it. I'm here now. Ethan's words settled into the ground like something finally being returned to where it belonged. The wind moved softly through the cemetery, brushing against the dry grass and the simple headstone that carried his father's name. For a long moment, Ethan didn't move. He stood there with his cap pulled low, eyes fixed on the stone, as if waiting for something: not forgiveness, not answers, but permission. When he finally turned away, the town of Red Hollow felt closer than it had the day before. Not physically, emotionally, as if it had leaned in. By the next morning, the tension had thickened. It wasn't loud or obvious. It lived in the way doors opened slower, the way curtains moved just enough to watch the street, the way people spoke in half sentences and unfinished thoughts. Ethan walked toward the diner just after sunrise. The sky was pale, stretched thin over the rooftops. His boots struck the ground with a steady rhythm, calm and unhurried. He wore the same denim jacket, the same dark baseball cap. A man unchanged by fear, shaped instead by time. Inside the diner, the bell rang sharply. Every sound stopped. Ethan chose a booth by the window, the one where the light fell soft and honest. He sat down slowly, placed his hands on the table, and waited. Seconds passed, then minutes. People stared, some with anger, some with curiosity, some with something heavier: guilt. Finally, a mug slid across the counter and landed in front of him. Black coffee. No cream, no sugar, no words. Ethan nodded once in thanks. Across the room, a woman stood up. The chair scraped against the floor louder than it should have. Sarah Whitman hesitated, then walked toward him like someone stepping onto uncertain ground. She sat across from him, folding her hands together to keep them from shaking. "You didn't have to come back," she said quietly. "I know," Ethan replied. "Then why did you?" Ethan looked out the window at the empty street. "Because if I didn't, this place would keep pretending." Sarah swallowed. "Pretending what?" "That my father didn't he die trying to protect people who were too afraid to protect themselves?" Her eyes dropped to the table. "We were scared." "I was 19, Ethan said gently. "I was scared too." Outside, a sheriff's cruiser rolled past the diner, slow, deliberate, unmistakably watching. Sarah followed Ethan's gaze. "Kane knows you're here. He knew the moment I crossed the county line." Sarah leaned in slightly. "You don't understand how deep this goes. The factory, the council, the water reports. It was all connected." "I know," Ethan said. "My father kept copies." Her breath caught. "You have proof? I have enough." By midday, Red Hollow buzzed with a quiet unease. Ethan walked the streets, stopping where memory pulled him. The old factory gates, the dry creek bed, the courthouse steps. People noticed. Whispers followed. Some men turned away when they saw him. Others watched with narrowed eyes. At the motel that evening, Ethan found the note waiting under his door. "Leave town. Tonight." He picked it up, read it once, and placed it neatly on the table. Fear had tried to speak. He chose silence instead. The knock came just after dark. Sheriff Kane filled the doorway, his presence heavy, his badge catching the dim light. "You're testing patience," Kane said. "I'm telling the truth," Ethan replied. "This town doesn't want the truth. That's never stopped it from being true." Kane stepped closer. "You've had your moment. Tomorrow, you're gone." Ethan met his eyes, calm and steady. "Tomorrow, I speak." The square filled the next morning without anyone calling it to. People arrived slowly, drawn by something they couldn't name. Fear, curiosity, guilt, hope. Ethan stood near the courthouse, cap low, hands visible. He waited until the murmurs died. "My father was killed because he refused to stay quiet," Ethan said. A hush fell. He discovered what the factory was dumping into the creek. He took it to the council, to the sheriff. Ethan's eyes locked on Kane. And the town chose silence. A woman began to cry. "I have proof," Ethan continued. "Documents, reports, names." Kane stepped forward. "That's enough." Ethan didn't stop. "You were lied to because the truth was inconvenient." Kane drew his gun. Gasps spread through the crowd. Ethan raised his hands slowly, calmly. "If you shoot me," he said, "you prove everything." A long, unbearable silence followed. Then a voice broke it. "He's right." Sarah stepped forward. Then Martha Ridgway. Then others. Kane looked around and realized the town had shifted. Sirens sounded in the distance. Not his. State investigators. Kane lowered the gun. For the first time in decades, Red Hollow didn't look away. The sirens grew louder. Not rushed. Not chaotic. Steady, like the sound of something inevitable finally arriving. Sheriff Kane stood frozen in the center of the square, his gun still in his hand, his authority draining away with every second that passed. The people around him didn't move toward him anymore. They didn't need to. The distance had already been created not by space, but by truth. Ethan kept his hands raised, his face calm, his baseball cap pulled low against the sun. He didn't look at Cain with anger. He looked at him the way one looks at a door that has already closed. The first state vehicle rolled into the square, followed by another. Doors opened. Men and women stepped out, official badges catching the light. Clipboards in hand, faces unreadable. Cain lowered his gun slowly. It hit the dirt with a dull sound that echoed louder than any gunshot ever could. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then an investigator stepped forward. "Sheriff Daniel Cain," he said, voice even. "You're being placed under arrest pending investigation into multiple counts of corruption, evidence tampering, and obstruction of justice." The words felt unreal. Cain looked around at the people he'd ruled through fear, at the town he believed would always protect him. No one stepped forward. No one defended him. 2 officers took his arms and led him away. As Cain passed Ethan, he stopped briefly. His voice was low, almost empty. "You could have stayed gone." Ethan met his eyes. So could the truth. Cain was led into the vehicle. The door closed. The sirens faded as the cars drove away, taking decades of silence with them. The square didn't erupt. There was no cheering, just people standing still, absorbing the weight of what they had allowed and what they had finally stopped. Ethan lowered his hands. For the first time since he'd returned, his shoulders relaxed. Sarah approached him slowly. Her eyes were wet, her voice unsteady. "It's over." Ethan shook his head gently. It started. The days that followed were heavy. Investigators stayed. Records were pulled. Names were written down. People were questioned, not with anger, but with exhaustion. The truth didn't arrive like a storm. It came like a slow tide, washing over everything the town had built on denial. Some people were angry at Ethan. Others were grateful. Most were simply tired. Ethan didn't stay in the spotlight. He answered questions when asked. He handed over documents his father had hidden. Then he stepped back. One evening, he returned to the cemetery. The sun was setting, painting the sky in soft orange and blue. He stood before his father's headstone, cap in his hands now. "They know," he said quietly. "All of it." The wind moved gently through the grass. "I didn't fix everything," Ethan continued. "But I stopped the lie from living longer than you did." He placed the cap back on his head. "That'll have to be enough." On his last morning in Red Hollow, Ethan packed his truck slowly. He didn't rush. For the first time, there was nothing chasing him out. Sarah met him by the roadside. "So this is it?" she asked. Ethan nodded. "This town needs to learn how to stand without me." She smiled sadly. "You changed it." "No," Ethan said. "It changed itself. I just reminded it how." She hesitated. "You ever coming back?" Ethan looked at the road ahead, long, open, honest. "Only if I'm invited," he said. He climbed into the truck, started the engine, and drove past the old wooden sign. This time, it didn't feel like running. The town watched him go, and this time, it remembered his name.